always remember when I did not understand how I used to stand under all the fool's rules running these lands. I had my head in the sand and I was asleep. Now I learn a little more every day and I'm waking the sheep. Gonna say it out loud, say it proud, get it out, cause I'm burning inside, cannot hide it no more. I'm a raconteur too. Yeah, I'm a raconteur too. Oh, I'm a raconteur too. All the people in the chat room singing. Oh, I'm a raconteur too. One more time now. Oh, I'm a raconteur too.
And good evening. Welcome to Raconteurs News. It's Monday edition, and my name's Jason Holmes. I hope you've had a good day. It's been a lovely, wonderful, beautiful weather we've been having recently. So in the next couple of days, there's probably going to be a little bit of spraying done, and they can't have us having nice sunshine and stuff as well. In the world, it's all incredibly insane as usual. We had the march on London over the weekend for people with Stockholm syndrome. And as I just want to explain, as I just explained to Paul, that I'm probably not going to be much use tonight because I've got a bit of like a fever and a headache and stuff. But I'm pretty certain that everybody's going to be able to. There's certainly going to be enough things to be said. But I'll probably be monitoring the chat room and having a look in there as well. I'm joined as usual by my co-host, the six-fingered Lancastrian from over there on the opposite side of one of God's green earth's neighbours, shall we call him? It's Paul Webster. Good evening, Paul. How you doing, mate?
I'm very well, and I'm not Lancastrian.
Well, it's Lancashire, isn't it?
Well, it's not Lancastrian, though, is it?
Well, I don't know. Whatever.
Well, exactly. But at least with you not being any use tonight, I might get a word in edgeways.
There is that possibility. There is that possibility. You may get a word in edgeways. What you've been up to anyway? Do you have a good weekend?
I had a quiet weekend. It was a good weekend, but I had a quiet weekend building up to going back to work today, which I've been, and nothing's changed. It's still shite. So, you know, such is the world. The world's burning at the minute. How can you not walk around with a smile on your face? Because it's bonkers, man. It's absolutely bonkers.
It is. What's caught your eye? I noticed there were a few things that I've noticed a rise in people who are having visits from law enforcement or somebody. You know, when they've posted something on Facebook, you know.
Especially Australia and New Zealand, because of everything down there, they've really moved. They're really stepping things up there. They want to get rid of all those guns that they still have in New Zealand. And, you know, the gun laws, they were written, the legislation passed after just 10 days. So there's one of those things that don't really going on somewhere, Jason, what we call an agenda that isn't really happening.
Yeah, there's certainly not one of them.
But I have just noticed that Michael Adair and Michael Bernassi have just been on RT Live talking about the Great British Mortgage Swindle. So, you know, I'm looking forward to watching this eventually.
Well, it's been a long time, hasn't it?
It's been a long time. Been a hell of a long time.
Long time coming, but yeah, hopefully it'll be worthwhile watching.
The guys have put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, they certainly have. They must have put a lot of work in because it took a long time. But anyway, we look forward to seeing that. The Great British Mortgage Swindle. But we've got a guest tonight. We've got a very special guest tonight, and I just wanted to get you. I'm going to take just a step back and probably turn my camera off, and I'll be monitoring the chat room and stuff. and I'll be jumping in from time to time. I'm just a little bit. I feel a little bit delicate, and just to prove to everybody, I'm drinking water. Right, that's how delicate I feel. I never drink water when I'm on this show.
No,
so,
pure vodka.
Pure, pure vodka. No, yeah, this so it's not. It's I assure it in.
Hey, denial's the first sign of alcoholic. That's all I'm saying.
I weren't denying it.
Oh.
Go on then, mate. Go on. You introduce your guest, our guest for this evening.
Our guest tonight is I've spoke to Lenny Harper. He's going to introduce himself. It's Lenny Harper, who's an ex-police detective himself, and I want him to tell us the story because I don't want to miss out any bits. I'm looking forward to some of the tidbits that we've discussed off air, especially with some stuff that he sent me, which can coincide with what we were talking about last week in regard to the McCanns. So there'll be interesting stuff coming up. Can you just unmute Lenny, Jason? And unmute yourself so I can hear you.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, it's like Andy all over again, isn't it?
Yeah, click on that little cog.
There we go. Lenny.
Go on, son. There it is. No, you've muted him. There he is.
There you go. Go on, Lenny.
Hiya, Lenny. Come on, mate. Introduce yourself, pal.
Evening, I'm Lenny Harper. Gosh, seems like a long time ago now that I retired from the police. It's 10 years.
Wow.
So after 34 years police service, I retired September 2008 from Jersey. As you can probably tell from the accent, I was born in Londonderry, Northern Ireland. Joined the Metropolitan Police in '74 after 3 years in the military police. Joined the Met, as I said, served in the Met in places like lovely areas like Brixton, Soho, Peckham, and lots of other places. Busy. Served then a period as a detective in the Royal Ulster Constabulary in West Belfast, and then went back to the Met again, up to Glasgow, where I served in the places Gorbals and Govan and a few other well-known parts of
action places you've been then, not leafy suburbs.
I thought of 6 months in the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames back in 1980.
Sounds like you're a bugger for punishment as well, Lenny.
Yeah, and then in 2002, I went to Jersey as head of operations, and then eventually as deputy chief constable. I was in Jersey for 6.5 years. The final year and a half or thereabouts, I was the officer in charge of what became known as Operation Rectangle, which was looking into allegations of sexual abuse of children in government-run care homes in Jersey.
And how long had those allegations been standing when you picked them up?
Well, when I picked them up, it was about the third time that a lot of them had been made. They had been made throughout the 70s and 80s. Wow. And just brushed aside. A lot of them had been made in the 90s, and the victims, survivors, were disgracefully treated. There's no other way to put it. They were just disgracefully treated by a combination of, and I emphasize the use of senior police officers because I absolve the investigators in most cases from any blame whatsoever. But it was a combination of senior police officers, members of the prosecution's authorities, the law officers department, and politicians and social services. And between the four of them, they intimidated, threatened, and just generally sent away survivors and victims who were trying to complain of abuse.
That's almost like them being abused again every time they reported it.
Again and again and again, and I have no doubt that, you know, were any of the survivors who went through that ordeal were to be watching this evening, that they will make their feelings known.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right, and you've hit it right on the nail. It's just like being abused again. And some of the things that we uncovered when we were reviewing a lot of the files that had gone before, actually showed that they were physically intimidated in ways that vulnerable victims of crime and abuse should not have been treated. They were put in rooms full of senior police officers, full of social workers, full of law officers, and even the people who were accused of assaulting them. And they were told that nobody would believe them. They were threatened. They were just generally treated as dirt.
Yeah. I'm lost for words because, again, I told you a little bit about my experiences with the police. These are the people that you're meant to go and report things to. And as we spoke earlier, we're not talking about the man and woman on the beat as such, but we're talking about the higher ups, because I had to go through a police crimes commissioner, complaints-wise, just to get an interview with a constable. When I told them what had happened to me in the courts, the constable agreed that's criminal. They can't do that. Yet then she goes to a detective sergeant who's not legally trained, but comes back and says it's a civil matter.
Yeah,
that's it. So even the good people, as I was telling you about, don't want to do the job anymore because they're being told to do things that does go against anybody with a conscience. And it seems to be an active incentive to find the right man and woman who will just follow orders, not question what they're doing. It seems to be reticent of it.
I think that, to put it into context, to put it into the Jersey context, you need to look at the way Jersey society is built. And when I mentioned the prosecution authorities a few moments ago, the head of the prosecuting authority is the Attorney General. Now, he's also the government's advisor on legal matters. Yeah. So you've got a conflict there right away. Now, when I arrived there, the Attorney General had a brother. Now, his brother was in a post called the bailiff. The bailiff is our equivalent of the Speaker of the House of Commons.
Right.
He's not as mouthy as the current House of Commons Speaker.
There's not many as mouthy as him.
but insidious in the way that the post was carried out. Now, he was not only the Speaker of the House of Parliament, but he also was the island's top judge.
Wow.
So the brother of the Attorney General, who's responsible for prosecutions, and also the government's advisor on legal matters, his brother was the Speaker in the Parliament and also the island's top judge.
It's a good job there's not a conflict of interest going on here, isn't there, Lenny?
Well, they don't know how to spell conflict.
Well, it depends if it's a legal conflict or an illegal conflict, because apparently there's two.
Now, the way that they banded together, and I'll do this very quickly because I'm jumping ahead, so to speak, of the story. But one of the cases that illustrated this was a case of a couple called the Maguires, Alan and Jane, I think it was. And Jane Maguire was what they called a house mother at one of the government-run homes.
Okay.
Her husband, Alan, wasn't employed, but he sort of appointed himself as a house father.
Right.
And over many years, these two abused children willy-nilly. Terrible abuse, physical, and allegations of sexual abuse as well.
Wow.
Now, the Children's Service, which is our equivalent to the social services here in the UK, had many, many allegations about this. Never did anything about it. And eventually they decided they'd got so many and there was so much pressure that they would go to the police. An investigation was started. The investigating officers did a pretty good job. And eventually, I think 13 boys and girls came forward and made damning statements. There were more, but some of them didn't reach the evidential. And these two cretins were charged with cruelty offences.
Right.
The victims were all gathered together and put into a room. Along with senior prosecutors, senior police officers, senior social services and the people who were alleged to have abused him. They were threatened, intimidated, told they wouldn't be believed, and quite a number of them were frightened out of their lives. And in fact, I think at least one of them later committed suicide. They brought a judge over from the UK to hear the committal proceedings, and the UK judge decided that there was ample evidence to commit these two for trial. And so they committed them for trial. Sometime after the committal, the charges were all dropped because allegedly the man was terminally ill. And this was in 1996. And the charges were dropped, and it was said that he would die within a very short time. Now, when I started reviewing that file a little while later, a couple of things came to notice. One, there was no mention whatsoever of any sexual offences on the file. They had been removed, apparently in agreement between senior police, social services and the prosecutors. So we were looking at a file which contained physical allegations only.
Yeah.
And we searched everywhere. We couldn't find any evidence whatsoever that this man was ill.
Brilliant.
And I was liaising with Panorama at the time, BBC journalist called Robert Hall. And Panorama eventually, who had sort of didn't have some of the limitations we had, tracked this man and woman down in France, looking remarkably fit and healthy.
Wow.
Like 14 years after he was supposed to be on his last legs. And they tracked him down, and he apparently was making a living in France looking after holiday homes of Jersey's elite.
There's definitely no conspiracy here, is there, Lenny? Come on. I mean, how can charges just disappear? Who would have access to be able to do that? Eh?
So we went back and we interviewed all that. We then managed to track down all the people who were making sexual allegations, and we re-interviewed them all again. We built a very, very good case, and the so-called independent lawyer that they had sent over to work along with me, who was actually more obstructive than anything else, and I'll speak more about him later. But
I bet he was well paid then, Lenny.
Well, the thing is, it's funny you should say that, because I was told that he was a child abuse specialist, and he was independent.
Which way to take that, you know?
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I was told also that he was independent.
Right. Straight away, flags are up for me.
Turns out, and this was verified by independent people that I'll again mention earlier, who are the real heroes of this story. But it turns out that he was actually he had never done any child abuse work, and that he was actually a specialist in financial crimes, and that he also worked for the chambers that the Attorney General in Jersey had worked for when he was training in London. But more sinister than that, that was the chambers that did all of the Attorney General's financial crimes work in Jersey. And they had earned millions and millions and millions of pounds from the Jersey taxpayer for doing those prosecutions on behalf of the Attorney General. So, so he was neither independent nor was he a child abuse specialist. But anyway, he told us that we had enough evidence to charge the Maguires, and he says all we got to do now is extradite them. And so that was it. But he came back a couple of weeks later, obviously having spoken to the Attorney General's office, and he says, "Oh, we have a problem with extradition." He says it's going to be difficult to get them extradited, and I couldn't figure this out. And I then spoke myself. I took it and I asked him if he would ring the CPS in London and get some advice. And the next couple of weeks, he just stalled and stalled and stalled. So eventually, I spoke to the man who actually had written the law, the extradition law in Jersey, and he said, "No, there shouldn't be a problem. You're getting extradited on that." He still hadn't rung the CPS in London, so I rang the CPS in London. I rang the head of their extradition department, a woman whose name I remember, funny enough. It was an Alison Riley. And Alison Riley told me that on the facts that I presented, there shouldn't be a difficulty at all. It was a straightforward extradition. Never happened. It just kept stalling and stalling and stalling. And when I left the island, they still hadn't been extradited. I don't think they ever were. He ever was. You can't hear you. I can't hear you.
We seem to have lost your. We seem to have lost your. We seem to have lost your mic, Webby. I don't know what's going on.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Lenny. It's Paul I can't hear.
All right. Yeah, I couldn't hear him either, Jason.
Yeah, it's Paul I can't hear. What you done? Have you?
No,
There you go. We can just about hear you then.
I've not done anything, mate.
Oh, there you go. We can hear you now. Excellent.
I haven't touched anything.
I've got you. Yeah.
No, I forgot what I even said there. Oh, the Maguires. It sounds to me like they actually know something because they don't want to be touched. They don't want to be brought into this. Jersey to me sounds like a microcosm of the macrocosm over here. It's just smaller. The corruption is tighter.
Yeah.
And that is unbelievable because, you know, it doesn't seem to matter where you go, and no wonder you're virtually a foreigner coming into their land and telling them what's gone on and what goes wrong.
I mean, the grip. It's difficult to emphasize the grip that little small elite.
Yeah.
And anybody. Now, I count myself very, very fortunate, Paul. Very, very fortunate to have left and come back to the UK. Those who supported myself and the survivors and the victims in Jersey paid an awful price. There's a list of names. You know, you may have seen some of them in your internet travels. There's Voice for Children, which is a blog which was very, very pro the survivors and victims, and myself, who uncovered a lot of evidence. There was a guy with a blog called Rico Sorda, politicians Stuart Sivry, Trevor Pittman and his wife Shauna. All of these people had their lives
destroyed.
You know, if not destroyed, at least 3 of them had their life. You know, that Stuart Sivry had everything taken from him. He was imprisoned. He was the Minister of Health.
Yes.
He tried to bring this to light, and he was just crucified, bankrupted. The Pittmans, Trevor and Shauna Pittman. Trevor Pittman was a politician who I didn't really know all that well, and but they tried to fit me up with a thing called a scrutiny panel, where they investigated the way that I had used financial resources.
Yeah.
They didn't tell me they were doing it. They never came to interview me. They never came, didn't even tell me the inquiry was on. The first I knew about it was when the headlines in the Jersey press was saying I had misspent a lot of money. And because then it was proved that actually, when you looked at what I had done, that I had spent far less than those that came after me in trying to bury the investigation, they had to open up a scrutiny panel. They made the mistake of appointing Trevor Pittman to the head of that scrutiny panel. And I think they suspected that, like a lot of other politicians in Jersey, Trevor Pittman would roll over and say, Lenny Harper was out of order, he was dishonest, he spent all this money. Trevor Pittman didn't. He did a very, very fair report. He also bitterly criticized them for not involving me in it. I mean, I was the one who was being investigated.
Yeah.
I wasn't even told about it.
Yeah, you have the right. You have the right to know
about it. So he was scathing. He was. They fitted him and his wife up. They libeled them in a totally separate matter, and when the Pittmans tried to take them to court, the judicial system in Jersey gathered round the elite.
Yeah.
And nobody could understand. Anybody with a sliver, anybody with a sliver of legal knowledge was dumbfounded at the fact that the Pittmans didn't win their case. They bankrupted them because of that. Both of them were what are equivalent of MPs in the Jersey States, the Parliament is called. And they lost their jobs, they lost their positions, they were hounded, threatened, intimidated. And, you know, anybody who raised their heads above the pulpit on behalf of the victims and survivors, that's the way they were treated.
Yeah.
The 2 people I mentioned earlier, the blogs, Voice for Children and Rico Sorda, were absolutely non-stop and hounding the truth out. They ferreted the truth out, but they were getting threats all the time. They were getting threats, derided. For a long time, those three blogs, the Stewart Survey, Voice for Children, and Rico Sorta, were the only outlet that I had to get the survivors and victims' story across. I mean, I was being relentlessly attacked, and I was under no illusion. I was getting attacked because that was the way they could get at the victims and survivors.
Yeah.
And but these three stood up, and they were counted along with the others, and their blogs eventually led to the Committee of Inquiry.
Wow. So the people had to pay price upon price, as well as the victims, just to get the story out, and we're still not even got to judicial yet. That's
well, you know, the Committee of Inquiry found that the man I mentioned earlier, who was a top judge in the island, and there was a politician there. The first Home Affairs Minister that I was dealing with during this inquiry was an honest, it was a female, and she was honest. She was sympathetic to the victims' cases, and she wanted to do the right thing. And she was just totally and utterly denigrated. I was there at a meeting one day with a senior politician and herself, and the politician turned around and said there, when she tried to say something, he told her to shut up, and he says, "We all know you just got this job because you're a little girly."
Wow.
And this was the equivalent of our Home Secretary that he was talking to.
Did nobody tell him? You can't say that these days. It's not politically correct, Lenny.
In Jersey, they can say what they want in Jersey, and she eventually was marginalised and had to go, and they put in a guy by the name of oh God, his name escapes me for the moment now. It'll come back to me, but they put in this Home Affairs Minister, Andrew Lewis. Now Andrew Lewis was. It seems so much. I keep wandering off here, so just pull me back if I go off script.
Just keep going, Lenny. Keep going. We'll always come back, mate.
My boss, the chief constable at the time, was a man called Graham Power, highly decorated police officer of the utmost integrity. Came from Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, had the Queen's Police Medal. A man whose integrity could not be questioned in any way. Throughout my tenure as senior investigating officer of the abuse inquiry, they were doing their damnedest to get rid of me, and they ordered him to sack me. He refused. He spent most of his time protecting my back from the politicians.
Yeah.
I got called into the again, I'm jumping this, but I was going to speak about Andrew Lewis, wasn't I? The Committee of Inquiry found that Andrew Lewis lied under oath to the committee because he had fabricated documents suspending my boss Graham after I left.
Right.
And the Committee of Inquiry said he lied. He lied. The evidence was there. They failed. They refused to produce the documentation for months and months until they were ordered to by the High Court. And eventually the documentation proved that they had fabricated letters which had allegedly come from London to justify the suspension of Graham Power. And he was assisted in this. And anyway, the Committee of Inquiry found that he had lied, and nothing's ever happened to him. He's now, as the last I heard, he was now about to stand for re-election again.
I was going to say, I'm surprised he's not been promoted.
Now,
this is how it seems to work, Lenny.
The Committee of Inquiry also said, and this was a play on words really, the top judge had made a couple of public speeches in which he criticised myself and said the real scandal was not the child abuse in Jersey, it was the way that I had rubbished the name of Jersey.
You have. Not the abuse, you.
Oh, no, that wasn't the abuse. Now, the Committee of Inquiry said they didn't accept his evidence. Now, to you and me, that means they thought he was telling a lie. But they didn't actually use those words. They didn't say he was lying because, after all, he was the Speaker of the Parliament, and he was the island's top judge. But they did not accept his evidence. They also said, this is just a funny aside, they made it very clear that none of the witnesses on the Committee of Inquiry would be cross-examined. There was no such thing as cross-examination. And every night they would put up the day's proceedings on the website, and it would say such and such a witness was interviewed by counsel for the inquiry, counsel for Jersey. When I gave evidence, I was in the witness box for 4 days under extremely hostile cross-examination. And every night, somebody with a gallows sense of humour, and obviously the Committee of Inquiry didn't notice it, but each night it was up there saying, Mr. Harper was cross-examined by... and obviously the Committee of Inquiry didn't notice that because they would have had it off straight away.
Yeah.
But the Committee of Inquiry found that the Jersey government had failed to look after children. They completely demolished every bit of their defence. They had either willfully, negligently been responsible for the horrible abuse of children throughout the years at Haute de la Garonne and other places.
Yeah.
And that's that is the context of the sort of, the sort of arena that the victims are trying to make themselves heard in, that I was trying to work in, and that the likes of Voice for Children, Stuart Sivery and Rico Sorda were trying to get the truth out. And Graham Power, as I say, he was day after day after day standing between myself and getting the sack and getting thrown off the island. And with Graham, the only other thing that really rescued me and saved me was the fact that very, very early on in the inquiry, I decided I would go full frontal with the media, expression, and I did so. And I went on there and I threatened anybody who intimidated the victims and threatened anybody who intimidated witnesses. I did press conferences where I broke the sort of regulation for police press conferences. I wouldn't do 5 minutes and then say, that's it. I stood there until they ran out of questions.
Yeah.
And one day I was on Sky for over an hour on a live interview. And I just was not going to walk away. And it got such there was two things that came from that. One was the fact that I managed to hang on and stay to try and do what I was doing.
Yeah.
Secondly, it gave the victims, the survivors, the confidence to come forward.
The hope that somebody's there who'll listen, somebody there who'll try and tell these people's stories, because we're talking about an island and people can quite easily say, well, that's over there. This is rife. This is in every town, every borough. It's nothing new, Lenny. And I was saying about good men and women I knew who joined the police. They all left because of how the police were going. The figures are all orientated. The public sector is just, it baffles me. You've got people in meetings saying, look at these figures. If we ignore those figures and those figures, look at how well we're doing. Yeah. It's absolutely insane that you can write something on a piece of paper and it carries all this weight. If you look at the banking system now that's controlling all this, the banking system does positive accounting. That means if you've got a debit, all you do is write in a credit. That's called positive. It doesn't matter that you've moved any assets. You just balance your books by positive accounting. Now, if you're allowed to do that legally, and you control the parts of the mechanisms like the police and the judiciary that these people in such a tight area need to get through to get their story through, it's easy. It's easy. It's not difficult. And then, woe betide, we bring in secret societies and Freemasonry and, oaths to other people. How can you hold a public office and swear an oath to somebody else? It's conflict of interest. That system's got to be dismantled. And you've got a prime example of where we'll be further down the line in this country, as if people can't see it already, Lenny. People have been telling me I live in a democracy. Now, I don't want to live in a democracy where 51% of the people can tell me what I can and can't do. I just want to do what I want to do as long as I cause no harm or loss. That would be the best way for everybody. But no, we've been taught away. Like, that's life. And that's what does my head in about talking to people who have put so much on the line. And I'm sure that you've had people who've trolled you and come after you. And I've had it, Jason's had it, John Wedger's had it. The amount of guests that we've had on, all have had it. Max Egan, one of the well-known reporters around the world, and he gets it all the time. You can't win with everybody, but this is a platform to tell stories. And anyway, Lenny, pick up from where you were.
Just talking about trolls? One of the worst trolls, a man who's got a real agenda, who came after me, but it has to be said, I wasn't his main target. The three that I mentioned earlier, the blogs, the Voice for Children blog, Rico Sorda's blog, and Stuart Sivery, he went after them with a vengeance and threatened them with death and everything. And he was no fan of mine either, but he was the brother of one of the things I looked at was that there were certain discrepancies. We had an IT department. IT department was run by civilians, and it was the head of IT was a very, very senior post. And there were certain discrepancies about the equipment on the IT, and we carried out an inquiry into it. And we found out that the three most senior people in the IT department had been buying hugely expensive IT gear on our budget and taking them straight home. And one of them also bought an expensive laptop and gave it to his son to go to university in the UK. But the other three, two of them were using it to make pornographic films. One of them involved his own wife. They were making these pornographic films on States of Jersey police equipment that they bought and taken straight home. And
wow. No wonder Jimmy Savile and Ted Heath got away with the things they did on that island, mate.
And when we seized all these, when we seized all this equipment, and one of the other ones had bought a complete recording studio and was using it to record his band, all on the budget of the police. Now, when we actually uncovered all this and we arrested them and did the file, they were most upset. They were really, really put out.
I bet they were.
this stranger coming in from the UK and daring to interfere with the Jersey way.
We've always done it like this. What's up with you?
Yeah. And so we sent the file to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General said, "Nah, no prosecution." So we then had to discipline them. Now, the problem was that on so many occasions when we disciplined people, we were not their employers. The government were their employers. Yeah. So if Graham Power sacked them, it was the usual that the government reinstated them. And perhaps the most blatant example of that was here I'm going leaping all over the place again because things just keep going. But there was an infamous police sergeant who worked at the police headquarters, and a very young constable came to me, and we were looking at this allegations of bullying by this sergeant, and young police constable came to me in tears and said that he'd been sitting in the front office one night in the police station, and this guy pulled a 9mm pistol out of his holdall and took it apart on the station desk, cleaned it up, and then put it back together again, cocked it, pointed it at this young officer, and then said, "Shall I?" "Nah, not tonight." And then he put the gun away again. And the young officer was suffering from, as you can imagine, quite a lot of stress over that.
Yeah.
And another incident with this sergeant, he went into work one morning at 6:30. He worked in the control room, and he told the control room staff he was just popping out for a while to move his car. He didn't come back until 7 o'clock the next morning. when we did the investigation into it, we found that his car was actually parked in Normandy. And he'd gone to the airport. He'd gone to the airport, got into his private plane, flew to Normandy.
Picked his car up and drove back.
Yeah. And hadn't gone into work that day. Now, we disciplined him and he got sacked. But a couple of days later, the government reinstated him again. Eventually, we made his life such a misery that he resigned and went off. But about 3 months later, he was arrested and convicted of racially aggravated assault against a young Portuguese lad of about 14. And this was the sort of environment that the abuse victims and survivors were trying to bring their stories forward.
Yeah. So did this then progress to the Halt de la Graine, or was this all ongoing at the same time?
This was all. I mean, it was the sort of, there was a, and what I must say first of all is that when I'm talking about the bullying and the corruption, this was only a small minority of the officers on the island, but that small minority had the
small clique can have a lot of hold, can't it?
It was their contacts. It was the clique that they were into. You know, they were maybe linked to the school where all the elite had gone to, and where the elite's children had gone to, and one of those was the subject of a horrible inquiry pre-Hope de la Graine, which was one of the reasons why then I took an interest in it. But how Rectangle, and this is probably a good place to start the sort of chronological thing, that I went there first, and we had this difficulty with a bit of bullying and the like. We sorted that out, although we were told by one politician that, in fact, at one stage we were called the politically correct Gestapo of police headquarters by certain politicians who said that, one politician in particular said a little bit of corruption never did anybody any harm. And he said that at a meeting with the Home Affairs.
That's typical of a politician, that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And
if only they worked for us, Lenny, instead of other people.
So we dealt with that, and then the next issue was over firearms. We discovered that on an island of 80,000 people, there were over 10,000 firearms licensed, and that 6.5 million rounds of ammunition could be held on the island at any one time. Now, some of the weapons that were being held were .50 caliber. They're called rifles, but in actual fact, they're more like cannons.
Yeah, that's a hell of a gun.
Yeah, and these were being used on a 25-meter firing range, a mile and a half from Jersey Airport.
Wow.
And so we that inquiry came to light when our firearms civilian, who was head of our firearms department, was a civilian, and we got a tip off that he was recycling guns that were being handed in. He was selling them off to other gun owners. And there were, I can't remember how many, I think there was maybe a dozen registered firearms dealers in the island, but it turned out that I think 3 or 5, can't remember the exact number, but 3 or 5 of them, their registered business was their home address. So they were storing all these. Now, we went to arrest our firearms clerk, and we're driving up to the estate where he lived, and I said to the cop, "Do you know the house?" He says, "Boss, you won't mistake it. You'll not mistake the house." And we turned into this estate, and we're driving down, and there's this semi-detached house, and on top of the house is a Sea-Cat missile launcher.
Just in case.
I said, "Is that the house?" Now, we went into the house and we recovered well over 100 weapons. But amongst the weapons we recovered were 2 RPG-7 rocket launchers.
Wow.
Which were supposed to have been deactivated, but in actual fact, they were within 2 minutes of being able to be reactivated again. I was so nonplussed that my brother was working in the Northern Ireland Police at the time, and I rung him up and says, "How many RPG-7 rocket launchers have you uncovered in Northern Ireland over the last I can't remember what he told me. And I said, well, I've just found 2 tonight. And so we charged him with a load of offences, and the Attorney General wouldn't prosecute him.
And I know a guy who got IPP sentence for recommissioning blank firers.
Yeah, well, the Attorney General wouldn't charge him, so we disciplined him. And Graham sacked him. But the next week, the states ordered us to reinstate him again. So we had to reinstate him again, but we wouldn't put him in the firearms office. We put him in somewhere else. And I went after him again a couple of months later for another blatant breach of regulations. And this time he resigned. However, I found out later he'd applied to join the honorary police. Now, that's a term I haven't used as yet. Jersey has this thing called the honorary police. And,
is it an oxymoron?
Well, it's an organization that I thought, when I went out there, were a bit like the Special Constabulary.
Okay.
They're nothing like Special Constabulary.
Mm-hmm.
They have got far more powers than the Special Constabulary. They're parish-based. They elect each other, and they don't wear uniforms. The uniforms seem to consist of a pair of welly boots and a fluorescent jacket. But they drove around in high-powered police cars, marked just like ours. They called us the paid police because there was no, they wouldn't make any distinction, whereas I insisted in calling us the professional police.
You're just not here to make friends there, are you, Lenny?
They had access to all our radio systems, which had extreme data protection implications. They used to leave files, confidential files, and they had a very unique way of dealing with domestic abuse. They just told the woman to catch herself on, she was getting supported, and then off they went. I found out later that this firearms clerk had applied to join the honorary police, and he was accepted.
Wow. I could sit here and say I don't believe it, but everything you've described is like within 80,000 people. You've described the blueprint of what, not only for this country but for Europe, for the world, and you've got it all just happening on one island. It's almost like it's a test bed. Yeah. And we've got the right people in the right places. Now, did you, I mean, the question's already come up in the chat room whether you're a Freemason or not, but did Freemasonry ever come into any of this?
Throughout my 34 years in the police, I never encountered any aspect of Freemasonry. I'm not saying it didn't exist, but I was vehemently against it. So nobody at any time, either in the Met or the RUC or in Glasgow or over in Jersey, I was never invited to join. I was never asked to go to any meeting. I never had any dealings with it whatsoever. I wasn't so naive to think that it didn't exist, but it kept out of my way. It perhaps wisely kept out of my way because I have no views on Freemasonry. I don't know enough about it. But I would have had a view if it had tried to interfere, or if I'd caught it interfering in anything that I was trying to do. Again, I'm not so naive as to think that it didn't have any effect at any time. Yeah. But it never came near me. It never raised its head. I was never invited to join. I was never invited to go to a meeting. I never had any dealings with it whatsoever, I'm glad to say.
Had you already made it quite clear that you wouldn't be interested if they did? Because obviously it stayed away.
Well, I just made my, I just made my feelings clear if a subject ever came up. And it may well be that it came up deliberately and I didn't notice it, but in my usual tactful way. And what I would have said wasn't any, I would have said, look, I don't care what people do if they stand with their trousers rolled up to their knees and take whatever oaths they want to take. It doesn't worry me. They can do what they want so long as it doesn't interfere with any aspect of, I joined the police to do a job. And I didn't always do it all that well, and sometimes you fail. Everybody makes mistakes and everybody fails, but I always did it to the best I could, and that did not include allowing anything to sway me that shouldn't have. I could look at somebody and say, I don't like you. You did this and I don't like you, and I'm going to do my best to make sure you pay the price for that. But whether their friends was in the Freemason, whether he was a Freemason police officer or not, wouldn't have made an iota difference. Nobody ever approached me and asked me to do a favor for a friend of theirs who was a Freemason. So it didn't arise for me, Paul, and it was never an issue.
Fair enough.
But
go on.
To go back to the beginnings of Rectangle. Do you remember Operation Oar?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Well, there were a number of things that started Rectangle, and one of them was Operation Oar. One of them was an investigation at Victoria College, which was the elite school in Jersey. There was some file reviews I was carrying out. There'd been previous allegations at Haute de la Garonne, and junior detectives had demanded investigations into Haute de la Garonne, but files had got lost and a blind eye was turned.
Yeah.
There was an approach from Birmingham City Council saying they had sent kids in care over to Jersey and nobody had any record of them. And then there was the Maguire case. So all those things were coming together. Operation Oar. One of the guys who was trapped in Operation Oar, and here we go again. This is again one of the guys who was trapped in Operation Oar. Was the head of the Jersey Sea Cadets, a guy by the name of Paul Every. And so there were a number of members of the States of Jersey Police who were also members of the Sea Cadets. And Paul Every got advance notice that we were investigating him.
Right.
Don't know how, can't point the finger at anybody, but it happened. When we seized his computer, he had installed very sophisticated software to scramble all the bits that he had on it. After a long forensic examination, we were able to retrieve some stuff, including that he had searched sites with the keywords naked sea cadets. So as soon as we got this stuff from his computer, I disclosed it to the Jersey Sea Cadets. And the admin officer of the Jersey Sea Cadets says, okay, right, let us know if he's convicted. And I said, no, hang on a minute. I think you misunderstand me. You've got to suspend him now. You have to suspend him now. And he says, no. He says he's innocent until he's found guilty. I said, no, you can't do that. I said, you have to suspend him now. I said, because children are at risk.
Yeah, what if he's abused another 17 kids while he's been invested in madness? He says, no, this guy was called Raisin. Remember him, Raisin. And he says, no, not suspend him. So I went to London, to the head of the Sea Cadets in London. The guy at that stage told me the same thing, just refused to help. I later found out that his best friend was arrested a short time later for buggering boys in a home in India. Wow.
So anyway, I went back to Jersey. I went back up to the Sea Cadets headquarters and I said to them, right, you have two options here. Either you suspend this guy or I'm going to stand outside the gates of the Sea Cadets headquarters tonight and tell every parent that comes to the Sea Cadets what has happened and what this guy's done, and you're refusing to deal with him. So he got suspended. I then asked for the files. We were getting other allegations about abuse and also involving senior Sea Cadet officers, a lot of them involving Haute de la Garonne.
Right.
And it was all based around the boating and yachting fraternity. So I asked for the files and they wouldn't give them to me. They refused to give them to me. So back I went to London again. And this time, because of the furor and because of the business in India with the boys being buggered, they had sacked all of the Sea Cadets headquarters staff. And they had put in a full-time naval commander, great guy, whose name I think was Bushell, Lieutenant Commander Bushell. He said, what do you want? I said, I want the files. It was getting near November 2007 now, about a week before Remembrance Sunday. And he says, right, okay. He says, I could order them to give you the files, but if I do that, they're going to go missing. And bits of them are going to go missing. I'll tell you what we'll do, he says. I'm in Jersey. I'm offshore Jersey next week for Remembrance Day. I'm on a naval ship. He says, you be at the Sea Cadets headquarters under some pretense about noon, and I'll march in unexpectedly, uninvited, and order them to give you the files there and then.
Interesting.
So that's what we did. And I'm sitting talking to this guy who's stonewalling me and saying, no. All of a sudden the door opens and in comes the Lieutenant Commander from the UK. The files are with me. 40 minutes. And that was the extent that you had to, that was the extent you had to go.
I can understand it. I can understand the extent you've got to go through.
So so there was that. Then there was this business at Victoria College, which was the college that all the elite went to. The Attorney General went there, the bailiff went there, their children were there. And unfortunately, some senior police officers' children went there, and they were on the Board of Governors as well. There was dozens of allegations about a senior teacher by the name of Jervis Dykes, who was assaulting young boys. And the police did an inquiry and dismissed it as rumours. Just dismissed it as rumours. The senior officers just dismissed it as rumours, even though 13 boys had come forward.
Unbelievable.
And then a young detective got hold of a video that had been taken on one of the Sea Cadet branch outings, and it showed this teacher masturbating young boys.
Wow.
There was no coming back from that. No coming back from that. He was arrested. He got convicted. 2 other teachers got sacked. So that was another step towards Rectangle. There was a guy called Thomas Hammond who worked for St. John's Ambulance Brigade. He was taking boys from Haute de la Garonne out on outings and assaulting them, indecently assaulting them and raping them. And he was eventually arrested and charged, committed suicide, I'm happy to say, while he was awaiting trial. Then there were the Birmingham City Council who rang us up and says, look, we've sent, I think it was 6 or 7 children over in care here some years ago. It must have been 8 or 9 years ago, he said, but we've no record of them. And we couldn't find any record of them either. They disappeared off the face of the earth. I think we eventually managed to trace all but 1 or 2 of them. But again, there was no record, absolutely no record of them being received into care in Jersey or being let out of care. And so when all that came together and we became very concerned, we started, and there was a lawyer who ostensibly worked for the Attorney General's office, but he was attached to police headquarters as one of our sort of police lawyers who dealt with prosecutions. And he was an honest man who was convinced there was a paedophile ring in the island. And he was worried that he could never get prosecutions brought for child abuse cases. So with him, a couple of other officers, we started looking through old files. And when I looked through old files, there were some disturbing indications that senior police officers had been involved in cover-ups. And so we decided to form this operation called Operation Rectangle. It was kept very, very tight. And the rest of the force thought we were doing a corruption inquiry, which we were quite happy to go with.
Yeah.
And we were just getting ready to go public whenever events overtook us. And the politician I mentioned earlier who had been trying to bring this into the public eye, we hadn't brought him into our confidence. He brought a panorama team over to the island to pull some stunt, which would have interfered with the inquiry because it would have jeopardized some of the evidence we were... Right. We had to get him in and say, look, this is what's happening. So he came in, Stuart Silvery came in, and we leveled with him. And I said, here's a copy of the press release I'm going to do in the morning. I've already given one to the Chief Minister's office. But whatever you do, you mustn't release anything tonight. You must wait until tomorrow because I'm going to be in bother if the Chief Minister finds out that I'm telling you and I haven't. So he says, right, okay, no problem. So he goes out. And I mean, I was annoyed at the time, but looking back now, he was under such pressure and he had his life practically ruined. He'd been to jail for trying to help abuse victims. The first thing he did was go and make it public. So it led to a very uncomfortable interview for me.
I can bet.
And I walked into the Chief Minister's office and the head of the civil service is there. And my boss is with me and the Home Affairs Minister's there. And the Chief Minister says to me, you're looking at a very angry Chief Minister. He says, what have I done? Well, why are you angry? He says, you've been talking to Stuart Silvery. So I says, well, look, and I explained, didn't pacify him. And then he says, you've got to stop using the term victim. I said, why? I says, they're victims of crime. That's what we use. They're not victims until somebody's convicted of assaulting them, he said. So I says, no. I says, and the Home Affairs Minister and Graham both supported what I said. The head of the civil service says, you do realize you're going to bring the government down. I said, well, that's not responsibility. I'm a policeman. I just investigate. You know, you've got to deal with that. I don't see how that'll bring the government down, but there we go. So we left, and from then on, I was on the outside as far as the government were concerned, and the you know, but it's what they can get away with. You know, we did this, and we went up front with the media, and we were deluged, absolutely deluged with victims coming forward, because we made it clear at the outset that if anybody interfered with them, but the victims all had one thing in common: we'll trust you. We'll trust you, but we're not going to help if you bring the Jersey Social Services in. Couldn't bring the Jersey, so I had to go back to London and bring the NSPCC over from London. In the first couple of days, I think we had somewhere approaching 150 victims come forward. Something like 80, 90 of those were victims of abuse at Haute de la Garonne.
Right.
We had something like 50 named suspects, 35 of whom worked at Haute de la Garonne. We couldn't cope. We had to bring in then investigators from the UK, and Operation Rectangle just took off then. But immediately, of course, that was when the political furor broke, and that was when they were continually trying to shut us down then.
Wow. We've just hit on 8 o'clock, Lenny, so we normally have a bit of a break here with us shown by our lovely host, Jason. So if you want to get yourself a drink or a toilet break or anything, how many you playing, Jace?
I'm just going to play one. It's 5 minutes long, so that's plenty.
That's sweet, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you guys can mute your microphones, I'm going to try something that somebody told me to do on a comment on YouTube. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to try and make sure that it's good quality. People can hear it.
Don't get us banned.
I've got a switch here which says mute microphone. I'm going to try that, Jason.
That's it.
That's the one.
Falls down from mournful clouds across a black grave. You're affecting me ecologically as you chase so long the butterflies away. See the people frown as the rain comes down on lit cigarettes. The raindrops play their games, but I feel unchained every time that it rains. I can never be a prisoner to the sky. But the harder it falls, we get trapped in walls, so by memories of our failures, and it's pouring over me. Looking at you, shivering me, standing here rearranging my dreams. I don't know what blind, think I'm losing my mind. The rain kicks you and you're down until you drown. But the harder it falls, we get trapped in walls. So by memories of our failures, and it's pouring over me. I keep falling over me. I can see there's a rainbow shining, showing me the way. I go blind. Time has left me so far behind. Now I wonder if I'll ever see the blue sky shining. My heart's crying. As the rain falls down, when the rain takes across, when the rain came down, you're a fairy to me. As we chase along, butterflies away. So people frown as the rain comes down. All of its sickness, the raindrops will make out.
There you go. That's East West and Rain, and that's give us a 5-minute break to get some stuff. Listen, like I said to you earlier on, I've been absolutely no good tonight. It's been taking me all my brain power to follow what's going on. But it's a very interesting chat. And there's been a few questions in the chat room. Kevin Street asked, does this man still get a police pension? And somebody else asked, did he copy hard files? Did he copy this evidence he says he witnessed? Or is it just hearsay? That's just a couple of comments from the chat room. So I'll hand back over to you, Paul, and you continue the conversation in any way you see fit.
Cheers. Lenny, do you want to answer either of those questions or both?
Can you? I take it you can hear me okay now again, Paul?
Yeah, sound.
First, yeah, of course I still receive a police pension. And secondly, everything I said is documented. I kept a lot of documents. Others kept many documents. If you go onto the blogs, Rico Sorda, Voice for Children, or Stuart Sivray, there's thousands of documents on there. I have thousands of documents. If you go onto the Committee of Inquiry report, which is a huge, massive report, all the documents are on there also. Emails, documents, all over. So I think anybody, I think the person who asked that question, obviously, I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but obviously haven't got a great deal of knowledge of what has gone on, because those who are living in Jersey will know that these documents are all on the committee website. They're all on these blogs, Voice for Children and Rico and Stuart Sivray. Everything I've said and everything I will say is documented, either in emails, documentation. It's all there.
So would you say that the fact is that because all that evidence is documented and that that wave did eventually have to break and wash away some of them at the very least, because it was just all there? It's almost like with the money that they spent to try and shut you up, it's actually put the spotlights on them. You know, really, this should be a completely done deal. It should just be a complete get everybody out and let's start again.
Yeah, but it hasn't been, Paul. You know, if you speak to people living in Jersey and looking at what's going on there, children are no more safe now than they were before. They just continue on their merry way, and you know, you mustn't be under any illusion. If it hadn't been for these brave people who put their head above the parapet, this would all have been washed under.
Yeah.
Washed away, because there would have been no committee of inquiry. The committee of inquiry laid it all bare, but they have ignored the results of the committee of inquiry. The committee of inquiry nailed them to the wall, and but they've just shrugged their shoulders and marched on. You know, there are still people working in the government in the states of Jersey who we had sufficient evidence to charge with child abuse.
Wow.
And so nothing. And if I'm wrong, then I know that some of the people in Jersey are watching tonight. If what I'm saying is wrong, they will be on and contradict me. And nothing really has changed. Children are not really any safer now than they were back then, because they've got the power. The UK government, for whatever reason, are very reluctant to interfere in that Jersey situation. They'll interfere in the Turks and Caicos Islands and suspend the government there.
Yeah.
But when it comes to people that they went to school with and went to law school with and worked beside, then that's a different matter. It's difficult to emphasize the grip that this small elite has on that society.
I can see it just from the local borough where I live. I've seen that elite, and I've seen what they're willing to do and what resources they're going to do to keep it that way. Anybody who puts their head above the parapet, they're open for shots. You
know, I mentioned Stuart Sivry early on, who was the health minister. Stuart went to war for the child abuse victims, along with Neil and the others, and Voice for Children and Rico. He went to war for them. He also brought to notice what can only be described as a serial killer in the nursing profession in Jersey. And there was a police investigation into that. The police felt it had evidence to charge. No charges were brought. Stuart tried to highlight it and got charged with data protection offences.
Unbelievable.
He actually did time. In prison, and this is the power that this little minority hold for the island.
Aren't they just opening an assisted suicide clinic over there as well?
No, that I don't know. You may well be right, but no, I don't know.
I mean, that again, we've just heard copious amounts of conflicts of interest and abuse of this system, and if they're going to open something like that, and people are going to pay to go and do that. People are being encouraged. Yeah. You know, I mean, I've seen some advertisements where people have said, "Oh, I've had a good life. You know, how about me choosing how I leave this world?" And I'm going,
yeah.
What is this mental state?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there were at least 3 suicides of former survivors of abuse. And another one who I had some communication with afterward, who was a victim of the Maguires. She unfortunately also took her own life a few years back. And that was some years after even Operation Rectangle, you know, so these people are still suffering. And they carried out what was supposed to be a compensation scheme. But, you know, the amounts that they were offering were derisory, and it was through clenched teeth.
So when people like that take their own lives, we do call it suicide, but is it not at least corporate manslaughter? There's something not right about this, Lenny, because, you know, I mean, there's a lot of work I do with council tax. Now, council tax is a commercial property tax, and yet six weeks or so before Christmas, there's a fella found swinging in his vestibule when the bailiffs break in for a £1,500 council tax bill, and they're harassing him for money that he's not only can you not pay it, but he's not liable.
Yeah.
And this system is up for abuse in a country this size, and you're on an island of 80,000 people. That is not hard to control at all, especially if you've got 2 RPG missile launchers.
I mean, you know, you're absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head there. It is a clear homicide. It's a clear manslaughter.
Yes.
And you know that when they're being treated the way that these survivors and victims were treated, and they're being intimidated and humiliated, harassed. And when eventually they do crack and they take their own lives, then it's manslaughter. There's no two ways about it.
I can't get around that fact. It's the fact that, you know, it's the same old story what we'll hear. These people were just following orders. That's the same old shite that we'll listen to, Lenny. And there's nothing new under the sun. This system is nothing new. The politicians, the ilk of them, are nothing new. We had Alex Thompson from the UK column on last week, who I get your bingo cards ready, lads and girls. Under the Bills of Exchange, I asked him, because he went to Eton, I said, the Bills of Exchange Act are taught to you lot by the age of 11. And his answer was, yes, of course, Paul. How else are we going to steal all your equity? So the system is designed. I was telling you about a gas bill. We are taught to pay. Well, when we pay, we make a mess of everything. The government step in and take things off us. That's a great scam to teach us. We teach us to undermine ourselves, and then these come in and say, oh, you've been a naughty boy, we'll have to take that off you. And that system is abused like that in this country. It's so easier with 80,000 people than 67 plus million. And they've still got it. They've still got it because we patrol each other. You know, where do you want to go with this now then? Because we got so far down it, as in, you know, it was a bolting thing and we've seen this happen. Obviously the Ted Heath stuff and the Jimmy Savile came out, but it wasn't at this point. So,
yeah, well, to be honest, the only time that Ted Heath didn't come up in our inquiry at all until after I had left the island.
Right.
And as far as I'm aware, there was only one person who came forward in respect to Ted Heath. I'm not 100% sure about that, but one person made a statement after I'd left the island, and I'm not sure what the strength of that statement was. Jimmy Savile, interestingly enough, only came up because the Sun newspaper emailed us a photograph of Jimmy Savile sitting with a bunch of children, and they said it was at Hotel Legarin. The nature of the photograph made it impossible. There was no building in the photograph. It was just a grass field, as I recall. So it was impossible for us to verify whether it was Hotel Legarin. He had visited the island. We knew that when we did the inquiries, but there was not a shred of evidence, and we didn't have any allegations against him. Make no mistake about it, and I've said this previously, if Jimmy Savile's name had come up, and if we'd had a statement alleging that he had assaulted any youngsters, children in Jersey, I would have sent detectives across to the UK to bring him back. No ifs or buts about that. If we'd got a statement, Jimmy Savile would have been coming back and placing his backside in a cell chair in police headquarters, but we didn't. And the Jimmy Savile thing then broke, didn't it, sometime later? I mean, we were trying to shout conspiracy and cover up and all the rest of it long before the Jimmy Savile business broke, and that made it a bit more difficult for us because people at that stage still had a tendency to believe in the government being honest and straight, and they wouldn't cover up a thing like child abuse, you know.
Hang on a minute, Lenny, I'm going to have to stop laughing. Go on.
You know, and people just felt that was a step too far to say that the government willingly covered up child abuse and put the interests of their own.
How things have changed.
Yeah, well, you know,
it's only 10 years, that, isn't it? That's only 10 years that attitude has changed because...
Absolutely. God bless Jimmy Savile. God bless Jimmy Savile. And, you know, it's a strange thing to say. I just wish that his case had broken before ours, because it would have made things a lot easier for us.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, well, the spotlight would have been on so much of it because of the Hotel Legarin. They managed to turn the spotlight off their own inquiry and then put it on Jimmy Savile, which, as we well know, all these paedophiles, when they die, they are burnt. They are thrown under the bus. They're dug up, thrown under the bus because there's something else going on. Because if there's one thing that I have noticed, that instead of conspiracy theories, you've got dozens and dozens and dozens of conspiracies. It only takes two people for a conspiracy. If me and you plot against Jason, that's a conspiracy. I'm sure there's more than two people plotted to cover up the stuff that was on Jersey. And then it's coming onto the mainland because they're not going to investigate. There's something about Jersey. Don't touch Jersey. There's something about that. It's not just about elites. There's, you know, there's something not right about all of this when you look at it as a picture of a whole. We could look at the individual bits, but you've got to start looking at it as a whole. And you see too many coincidences that come straight to the center of that spider's web. Who's in the center of that spider's web is where you get stopped with your investigations.
Well, I mean, you know, we, as I said earlier, we had all these different strands leading in, and most of them were pointing towards Hotel Agarin. So what we decided we would do is we would take advice from the UK, and myself and a couple of my officers, my head of forensics, went across the UK, and we met up with the homicide working group, who were all expert homicide detectives in the UK. We met with forensic experts, forensic archaeologists.
Were these all proper experts, not like the child abuse experts?
No, these were all proper bona fide experts in their fields, forensic archaeologists, anthropologists, the murder, and also the homicide working group. And we laid out everything that we had. And they said, you've got to go in and search. We also had allegations about Hotel Agarin that some builders had been renovating the place 5 years before, and they had discovered some bones.
Right.
And one of the builders took it to the foreman. The foreman says, throw them away, let bygones be bygones. And that phrase became a bit of a catchphrase for our team. When we covered anything, we would look at each other and say, let bygones be bygones. And the builder was told by the foreman that throw them away. He took them home, and he went on the internet, and he was horrified to find that what he had in front of him, and his own expert view, looked remarkably like a children's thigh bone. And so he called the police, and the police turned up. Young detective looked at it, thought, oh, bloody hell, I don't like the look of that, and called the pathologist. Pathologist didn't come down. The assistant pathologist came down. She looked at it and she says, oh, you're right, I don't like the look of those.
Wow. And
she took them back to the pathologist's lab. The bones then disappeared. The pathologist, the senior pathologist, did a 4-line statement, which is also on the files, if somebody cared, for that gentleman or woman who was interested earlier on of it, where it was all documented. Did a 4-line statement saying these were cow bones, animal bones, they're too big to be a children's bone. The anthropologist, also a child's shoe was found along with the bones. So the detective, the anthropologist then threw the bones away. When I started looking at it again, and I showed the measurements and all the rest of it in the photographs to our anthropologist, who was a forensic anthropologist. The pathologist wasn't really qualified to say whether they were human or not, but the anthropologist was. She said, that's perfectly within the range of a child's thigh bone.
Wow.
So we asked the pathologist what he did with the bones, and he says, oh, I burnt them, threw them away. And then we says, well, what about the child's shoe that was found? And he says, oh, I sent that down to Jersey Museum. When we went and spoke to the museum curator, it had never arrived. So I gave instructions for the pathologist to be interviewed under caution, but I don't think he ever was, because I left the island shortly afterwards. I don't think he ever was. But there was that. And then we started getting word that people had been raped in the cellars. And so the homicide working group says you've no choice. You've got to go into Hotel Agarin, do a search, do 3 days, and take these 2 dogs with you. These 2 dogs are fabulous. One's a cadaver dog called Eddie, and the other one was a blood detection dog called Keela.
Now, where else have we heard these names?
The Madeleine McCann case, the very dogs. So, and we went to Hotel Agarin, acting completely on the advice of the homicide working group and experts in the UK. First day in, we let the dogs out around the grounds, and they sniff and don't react to anything. So we put them inside the house, and I've still got the video of the dog when we put them in. I've got the actual video as it happened, live video as it happened.
Wow.
And Eddie's going, and he goes, and then all of a sudden he goes berserk in this room. And believe it or not, it was the room where these workmen found the bones.
That's unbelievable.
So we dig it up, and we don't find much because everything was taken away, we think, when the workmen took all the bones away. But we do find a fragment, and that fragment came to be very significant because it was used to beat us about the head. And the anthropologist looks at it and she says that's a part of a child's skull. Now, this anthropologist was used extensively. She was also very successfully used in the case down in Wales where the guy murdered the young girl and burnt her body in the fire, and the only bits were found a couple of years back, not that long ago. She was the anthropologist involved in that. And she said that's human bone. So we sent that off, and we were going to keep it quiet for a while, but we found a News of the World photographer hiding in the bushes. He'd been tipped off by somebody within the, so we had to go public. But we sent that off to be analysed. It went away. A couple of days later, the archaeologist came to me and said, look, we can rule that out really, because the area where I found it is pre our investigation. All the other stuff in there comes from before our investigation would have started, because we'd set a time limit of, I think, 1950 or 1945, 1950, I think it was. And he says it's pre-1950, we think. He says, but that's quite far down, so we'll keep. So the dog reacted in a number of other places, and we found more. And then one day, the chief minister came to see us, and the Home Affairs minister came. Of course, we were then getting allegations that people had been raped in the cellars. We couldn't find the cellars. We just couldn't find them. And an MP, a member of the state's parliament, contacted us. And funny enough, his name was Kevin Lewis, another Lewis. And he says, I was part of the team that did the renovations. I'll show you where the entrance to the cellars is. He showed us the entrance to the cellars. We dug in. We had to dig in from underneath and behind, and we eventually got in there. We put Eddie, the dog, in first, and Eddie went absolutely ballistic in there. So we pulled him out, and we started digging up and doing it. And we put him back down in again when we got the whole cellar uncovered, and he went absolutely berserk. So the archaeologist and the anthropologist went in, and we eventually found something like 136 bones, and a number of them, the anthropologist says, those are definitely human. Those are definitely human. We sent them to a pathologist, Professor Chamberlain at Sheffield University, who said quite unequivocally, these are the bones of a human child. They were fleshed and fresh when they were burnt. And they were, and that's documented as well. That is documented. His report and the note of his conversation are documented. They were fleshed and fresh when they were burnt. We couldn't understand where they'd come from. It seemed to be a bit, but then in another part of the building, we found an old furnace. The dog reacted at the furnace. Eddie reacted at the furnace. Well, there was nothing in the furnace, some dust. But the archaeologist was able to match the dust in the cellars on the other side of the building to the dust in the furnace.
Wow.
And his theory was that this furnace we found then was cleaned out in the early 60s. And that the debris from the furnace, which included the bones, I haven't mentioned the teeth yet, we found over 100 teeth. The bones from there and the teeth from there were taken and buried in the cellar. The archaeologist said from the way they were swept, they were deliberately concealed. And he put all that down on paper. He put that independent archaeologist, forensic archaeologist, put that down on paper. Says they were deliberately concealed. And we knew then, when I was doing the media stuff, they were saying, so you've got a murder, you've got homicide. I said, no. I can definitely say that children were buried illegally at Haute de la Garenne. What I can't say is that how they died. These bones were then sent all over the place, and the carbon dating was, some of it could have been 300 years old, but some of it could have been as young as the 1960s. So there was disagreement with Professor Chamberlain's original, but the bits that he and there's a team from America now doing an inquiry into this and a documentary looking at this, because it appears that the bones that were sent off never came back again. They just disappeared.
Sure.
The original item that we had recovered and sent off, which became known as Jar 6, we had ruled it out of the inquiry. We got a thing back from the lab saying we found collagen in it, and we're going to try and date it, but there's definitely collagen in it. We found I forget what it was, 7.5% of collagen, and you only need 3% of something to be able to date it. Now, the interesting thing about that, Paul, is collagen is only found in mammals, including human bones. It's not found in wood. It's not found in coconut. It's not found in anything. So our at this stage, we hadn't told anybody we had ruled it out of the inquiry. So they were still working on the theory that this was a vital piece of evidence for us.
Yeah.
So what they did was they passed it around to different people without logging it, without recording its movements.
Wow, that's criminal.
It is.
That's criminal.
And even if it had come back as a crucial piece of evidence, it was ruined.
You couldn't use it because it's got to be a chain of evidence.
Yes. Well, when we put that to Home Affairs Minister during the Committee of Inquiry, he didn't know what a chain of evidence was. So it came back. It came back, and the anthropologist who had originally looked at it says, "Oh, this has changed shape, it's changed texture, and it's changed size. I can't say what this is without examining it again." In other words, she was inferring that somewhere along the line it had been switched.
Yeah. And that would have been, if that had come about where you tried to use that as a vital piece of evidence, it'd have been enough to throw the entire case out.
It was gone. But interestingly enough, one of the technicians who handled it says, "Doesn't look like bone to me, it looks like coconut." And this was just a technician messenger, who wasn't qualified to say what it was. Mm-hmm. But our enemies seized on that, and hence the coconut myth was born. But nobody ever explained how come in this so-called coconut that there was collagen. The lab found collagen, which is not found in wood or coconut. So we had this situation where, and I mentioned earlier, the dogs came in for a lot of abuse. The dogs and their handler came in for a lot of abuse. But I had 100% faith in these dogs. And right at the very outset, I set them a number of difficult tasks. One of the anthropologists was away to Egypt to do some work, and had a few days away, brought back a little feel of sand from a mummy's tomb. Right? Mm-hmm. We opened this field and we went down to a huge beach, big open beach. We buried this little amount of sand from this mummy inside this mummy skeleton, and put it in the sand, covered it up. We set Eddie the dog off. This was a huge beach. Within 2 minutes, he was standing above it, indicating to it.
It's mad, isn't it?
And, we repeated that time after time with different tests for different politicians. The blood dog, we had allegations that a girl was raped in the bath in the cellar. And by this time, the politicians were denying the existence of cellars. And we found the bath. We found it underneath an entry in where boys said they'd been dropped down, and the girl says she was raped in there. And one of them said she had a forced abortion in there. We put the blood dog in, Keela, and she reacted in the bath. We couldn't see anything. But the blood dog reacted because we'd done tests with her. We dabbed we pinpricked a hand, dabbed a little paper napkin on it, wrapped the paper napkin up, stuck it behind a radiator pipe in the building, and set that blood dog out. She found it within 3 minutes. Yeah. And
we still don't know how the science behind these dogs, how they can suss that out of all the smells they've got. They still don't know it.
No, and so we brought her in the bath. She reacted. We couldn't see anything. We brought a forensic team across from Bedfordshire Constabulary. Bedfordshire Constabulary. They examined the bath, did tests, and says, yep, we found blood. We found traces of blood. That evidence disappeared. The bath disappeared. Everything was gone.
Wow.
And when I left the island, that was never heard of again. Chamberlain's statement about the fleshed and fresh bones were never heard about again. I produced his report to the Committee of Inquiry. The people who took over from me, who treated the victims in an abominable fashion, they destroyed all the exhibits, destroyed all the evidence, destroyed the statements that supported the forensic bits at Haute de la Garonne. And again, this is all on video. You know, some of the victim witnesses went to meetings with these people who took over from Graham, and I challenged them about destroying the evidence. And it's on video about them saying, well, they were hopeless. I mean, when I came out of Haute de la Garonne as part of the search, and this shows exactly the way the media treated the victims. There was a reporter called Deanne Simon, who worked for the local Jersey newspaper, which was owned and run really by the government. And when I came out of Haute de la Garonne, she says, "Did you find the words gone from my mind now. Shackles. Did you find the shackles?" She asked me, "Did you find the shackles?" I said, "No comment to make. We found some items, but I'm not saying what they are." No comment whatsoever. She said, "Well, you must have found the shackles because the builders told me they found them 5 years ago when they were renovating, and they left them in there. So you must have found shackles." And I says, "I'm not saying anything." Next day, she did a big article saying that builders had told her that they had found shackles in the building, and she had put it to Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper refused to comment. 3 months later, when the full frontal attack had started on us, and they were denying that there were any cellars ever existed, despite the fact that it's still on YouTube, Panorama reporters standing in the cellars, and they had denied their existence, she did another article accusing me of whipping up a frenzy, coming out and whipping up a frenzy about shackles. And I says, "I never mentioned shackles. You mentioned shackles. You're the one who brought the shackles into the..." So that was the way that the media...
Sounds more like shekels are involved here.
You know, that was the way the Jersey media were treating the situation as if they were defending the image of the island. The victims were getting
That sounds like it.
Victims were getting involved in at every level.
Oh man, you know all this stuff goes on. I mean, I'm in touch with a lot of people who've been, survivors of child abuse. Some of the groups down in Nottingham, some of those people have gone through some horrendous times, and to stand shoulder to shoulder with each other and come forward and still take that on with all the abuse that they're getting. You know, we've talked about people who are up and down the country campaigning for this abuse, and they're targeted. And there's the amount of money that's spent to shut these people up.
Yeah.
It's far beyond what it would be to actually investigate. Now, everything that you discovered there, if that was in my cellar or in Jason's cellar, Lenny, I'm in jail. I'm in jail. Circumstantial evidence or not, I'm going to jail for that.
Yeah.
Now, I put it to you before we came on, because we're discussing these dogs. Now, this Madeleine McCann stuff that's come out on Netflix, a friend of mine was watching it, so I ended up watching bits of it, and she ended up telling me to shut up because I was commenting on stuff. No, I've seen this. And so she ended up, shut up. Now, I can't get past the fact. No, we can play about with words and talk about lack of DNA, lack of who it belonged to, or anything like that. Yet, the dog indicated that there was a corpse-like material or corpse in the apartment in 2 different places, in the car they rented weeks after, on her clothing in a car park. On her clothing. Why would a corpse? Has she just been down to the undertaker and cuddled the dead body? Or the questions for me have got to stop. with the parents at that point, if I was investigating it, I couldn't go any further than the parents right there, because there's too much circumstantial evidence pointing at them. But to think that they employ this big PR firm where the Prime Minister gets involved, I'm going, wow, this wouldn't happen to anybody else. What is it? Who are these people? What connections have they got? And you're talking about the same thing, but in such a tight, enclosed area with their own government that are just allowing to do what they like. That you can't say it plainer than what we've explained it.
I had 100% trust in these dogs, but the thing that people didn't acknowledge at the time and didn't realize, these dogs can't give you the answers. You know? These dogs told the investigators, there are questions here to be asked.
Yes.
Just ask the right questions. The dogs can't say that cadaver scent belongs to Madeleine McCann. The dogs cannot say that. They can say there are questions here that definitely need to be asked.
Do you not think the best part of it as in regards to any suspects, to any of this stuff, when I mean, okay, you mentioned some good journalists who've been helping you, but when the media do the trial in public like that, then that evidence can't be brought. And the fact that they were talking, it seems to me that that's how it was designed to do. That's what the PR firm was brought in for.
Yeah, I mean, they're very educated people. They're part of that sort of, you know, and you could see that in the way that their friends closed around them. And I mean, I don't know what the truth of the story is. And
nobody does. Some people do, but
you know, but it just doesn't seem that, you know, there are other kids that go missing. There just seemed to be something coordinated about this response.
Well, I also saw that there was a mother I think it was a son that had gone missing in Portugal, and the police hadn't looked for him because of all the stuff that was going on with Madeleine McCann. Now, the paedophile ring, one of the photographs was published. She found that her son had been snatched by this paedophile ring. It was published, a picture that her son had been taken. Now, where he is, alive or dead, she still doesn't know. But there's a paedophile ring operating there. The fact is, I still can't get away from the fact if a cadaver dog indicated on my clothing my daughter missing in an apartment I'd rented and the car that I rented, there was death. And my daughter's missing. And I don't get that, why I'm not in a cell. Why am I not being interrogated? I don't get that bit, Lenny.
Yeah, there are a lot of unanswered questions about that case, and I don't know if we'll ever know the truth of it.
As long as it's being covered up as well as it is, because I mean, anybody who brings questions about it, as soon as people who are bringing questions are getting attacked, that makes me suspicious. If somebody says, hey, I've got the truth, and without questions, you're just attacked, because if somebody actually engages you in debate and you're telling the truth, they're not going to debunk you. So instead, they attack, they assassinate, they put people into, like what you were saying, they harass them to the point where they commit suicide. That has happened with so many witnesses to different things who have made allegations, and yet everybody knows that politics is corrupt, judiciary is corrupt, banking's corrupt, police are corrupt at levels, yet we just keep going on. What do we do? What do we do, Lenny? Because we know that voting doesn't work, because we don't live in a democracy, obviously. What's the answer? What's the answer, Lenny? Because there's kids getting abused now as we speak. There are thousands of kids getting trafficked and abused, and this is government sponsored at whatever level we want to look at it. I've just had friends sending kids to school with red noses on. They're sitting on millions and buying armaments. What are we doing?
You only have to listen to John Wedger to see what you know, the extent that is going on, and the attempts that are the lengths that people will go to try and suppress that. It doesn't matter what level you are. It doesn't matter who you are. If you try and put your head above the parapet to try and defend the interests of these vulnerable children, you're going to get crucified. Look at Mike Veal, the Chief Constable of Wiltshire, and the Ted Heath. I mean, look, that he's been hounded every step of the way since, you know, all sorts of allegations leveled against him, and simply because he he dared to investigate allegations against the former prime minister.
Exactly.
You know, John Wedger's life has been John's family have been put in danger. He was threatened with his children being taken into care, and yet he's refused to back down. He's refused to give up. And you know, a promising career, investigating crime was cut short because he would not sacrifice his principles.
Again, I've experienced it myself when I came out and was telling truth and saying, look, these bills things that you're trying to pay, you can't pay them. You're getting yourself in trouble. This is what you should be looking at doing. When you go into court and you're telling people that this is wrong, that they've been taught all their lives, I'm called names, I'm attacked. Yeah. And I'm telling, hey, your gas is free. You're a dickhead, you Webby. It's bonkers, because I genuinely thought when you tell people this could make your life easier, they don't want to know because it causes that fear. They'll still carry on doing what makes things bad for them. Now, if I'm not going to attach Stockholm syndrome to that, I'm going to say it's at least cognitive dissonance, because nobody's thinking. Because when I challenge people to think about this stuff, Lenny, they have no answers other than complete utter rhetoric that is bollocks.
Yeah.
It's like voting for Labour because my dad did. That doesn't work anymore. Labour is not what Labour was when your dad voted for him, and they weren't what your dad voted for, what he thought. Anyway, the two parties are the same. There's nothing going to change until something makes that change. And I have to say, they're doing more work for us now by trying to not only cover up all this bullshit with Brexit, because when you look at the Lisbon Treaty, we're never going to leave this thing, Lenny. It was never going to happen. They couldn't allow it to happen. They can't. The people.
Too many of them have got their fingers in the pie.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
I mean, MEPs over in Brussels, I think they've got they've got a massive, let's call it like Liverpool One, or massive shopping place where nobody carries cash, and it's only MEPs that go in there. This is unbelievable kickbacks to shut people up, because they're going to give them all the vices, and then they go, hey, we've got this on him, hey, we've got that on him. We had Lord Fortescue in the 70s telling the BBC that, oh yes, ministers have come to us with problems of maybe debt or scandals with young boys, and we would make them go away, earning brownie points. And when they got into positions where they could help us, we'd go, hey, remember when we did that? They've told us the truth all the way along. Yet people are still going through with what they do every single day. And until their lives become slightly difficult, I don't think anybody will change. I'm not sure I would have, Lenny.
Yeah.
It's when you get put in that predicament. I mean, as you were saying, you ended up leaving the island. Did you leave, or was you pushed, or?
No, I actually reached my retirement date and left about 10 days before the retirement date on holiday. So they, as I said, Paul, it was only the strength of Graham Power and the upfront dealings with the media and the support that I was getting from the victims. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. The ordinary people in Jersey, I got to say this. We couldn't go out. I couldn't go out with my wife or my family who were over visiting, but people were coming up and thanking me for what we were doing for the island of Jersey. These were ordinary Jersey people who knew what was going on, knew what their government were like, and we could not. There wasn't one night that we went out that somebody didn't come up and say thank you. So we were getting, on one hand, getting all this hassle and intimidation and threats from the politicians and the law officers department, and on the other hand, the ordinary people in Jersey were right behind what we were doing. So when it came to it, it was the end of my contract. It was my retirement date, and I was lucky. I caught the overnight ferry back to the UK, and got on with my life. And but unfortunately, those who stayed behind to continue the battle, like the Neil McMurray with the Voice for Children blog, and Rico Sorda and Stuart, so all the rest of them who had to carry on the fight, were still being intimidated, threatened, their families threatened, and you know, they still had to live with this. They're still living with it.
Well, if any of the groups or any members of the groups want to come on and talk about their experiences, just to get the story and keep it going, Lenny, you know, put them in touch with us by all means, because we provide a platform for people to tell their stories. We don't get people on here and try and assassinate them, despite of what other people want us to ask these questions. We want to get a story, because at the end of the day, Lenny, no disrespect to you, if you were telling me a load of bollocks now, it's all going to come spilling out and you'll look the bell end, not me. And it's going to be the same with everybody. So come on here, be public, speak your truth. If it's bullshit, it's always going to come out. That for me is what, when Jason asked me to co-host on here, that's what we were talking about. Letting this be organic, not be an organised thing. I work 40-hour week. Jason's was working. He's not been so good. We don't come together like a production team and stuff like that. We do things as and when we can. We might not speak to each other all week. Yeah, I might get a couple of guests that I've done in between a couple of emails. It's just getting the story out, get people talking. When we started, there was only me and Jason and Andy talking to ourselves. That's what we said. If there's only us three and then Aid as well, so be it. But people are starting to listen and people are starting to ask questions. It's not something that is used to go out and beat people up. I'm more willing to have anybody on here. And any allegations made, they have a right of reply. John Wedges had his say. People want to have their say against John. John had to have his say because of all the allegations made last year. I mean, he was that busy last year. I couldn't get him on last year. Yeah. And it's coming on to this year. And I said, look, John, I know you've been through it all, but all these questions still stand from up our end. So he was asked about the monies and all this kind of stuff. And it's still not satisfied. There's still questions of people. I don't think I can get those answers off John Wedger, because if John Wedger is lying, he's not going to come out with the truth and just tell me. So we've got to do what we can do. Lenny, you were one man. You did what you could do. You retired. What are you meant to do now? You're meant to go to B&Q, get some 4B2 and nail yourself to it. I don't know. People have got to do what they do within their boundaries in their life, because it's the same as I'm not going to go to Moss and concrete myself and chain myself to somebody to stop fracking. That's not in my remit. That's why those wonderful people who do that, I applaud them. I stand up for people who come into my workplace and say, those dickheads, 20 minutes took me because them dickheads are stopping your water table being poisoned. We need all these people to stop fighting and squabbling with each other. Direct it at where it needs to be directed. Sort that out, then we'll sort each other out, because while we're arguing with each other, there's too much more going on. Yeah. So I wanted to listen to. I mean, the dogs was a bit of a bonus actually that you worked with them. I didn't know to what detail you had, but when I investigated and researched about these dogs and the fact it was a new type of science, but these dogs were so almost spot on. And you were right. The dogs weren't saying, "This has happened here. This is how it happened." They're going, "Something died here," you know. Is that
another interesting story about the dogs? Those two dogs were also used in America and uncovered some of the remains of the dead soldiers from the Battle of the Little Bighorn.
And is his name Martin, the fellow who has the dogs?
Yes, Martin Grimes.
Martin Grimes. And isn't he with the FBI now, working with them? He
was working with the FBI. I've got a feeling he's back in the UK now, but I'm not 100% sure.
See, I felt sorry for somebody like that who's obviously worked with these dogs, and these dogs know what they're doing. They've been tested. Look at what you did. Putting a vial of sand that had death in it into a beach and the dog finding it. You know, people could say, oh, well, you know, you can make all this stuff up, but the fact is that is great circumstantial evidence. I mean, I've read cases where they've never found a body, but they've convicted using that evidence. But they've asked the right questions within the case. And I think with these dogs, I think the media's part in it made it more difficult for the right questions to be asked, because it had just been exploded. No judge is going to say that's inadmissible. It's not been a fair trial. So I can see where they go with it. We've got the last 5 minutes, Lenny. Do you want to tell us what you've done since you left? Because obviously it sounds like you're still in touch with these groups. So
I'm still in touch with a number of the survivors through Facebook and bits and pieces, not regularly, but now and again. I've tried to support them whenever I can. I'm still in touch with the likes of Stuart Sivry occasionally. Voice for Children and Rico I was in fairly frequent touch with, particularly around about the time of the Committee of Inquiry, when they were great assistants, and they gave evidence to the Committee of Inquiry as well. Paul, I've got a feeling actually that I know for certain that Neil McMurray, who runs the Voice for Children website, I know for certain that he's watching tonight. So he may well have picked up on your invitation.
Yeah, more than welcome. More than welcome.
If not, then I will mention to him. But I know he was watching and listening, so he may well have picked it up. And Neil and Rico and Stuart Sivry, the three blogs in particular, between the three of them, they have got a chronological history, because I supplied a lot of documents to them as we were going along, because it was my only, as I said, I brought a load of documents back. The Attorney General in Jersey tried to retrieve all my documents. Ordered me to hand them back in. He even ordered me to hand over the well-wishers cards that I received from my team when I retired. And he insisted that there might be something relevant to the inquiry on them. The real reason why he wanted them, obviously, was to find out who were my allies. Yeah. So what I did was I refused to give them to him. He wanted the originals. I refused point blank. What I did was I made copies. I then blanked out all the names on the copies so they couldn't be read, and then copied them again, blanked the names out again, and then copied them again and sent them the fifth-hand copies. And he wasn't able to glean anything from that, other than that there were quite a few insults about him on them, and which was the reason why I sent them. He demanded my notebooks that I used to carry about. I refused to hand them over. I sent them out for safekeeping to various friends because I needed them. If I hadn't had them at the Committee of Inquiry, I would have been lost.
Yeah.
I refused to hand them. He ordered me to return all documentation that I had. Well, everything I had was copies, so I just refused point blank. He tried to get me arrested by the authorities in Scotland, who told him to take a hike. I was intending to go to Jersey to give evidence for the Committee of Inquiry, but we got tipped off by a friendly solicitor that as soon as I arrived, I would be arrested and locked up for a couple of days until the
inquiry had finished.
So we didn't go. Instead, we did it by a telephone link from a video and audio link from Edinburgh.
Yeah, video link. Yeah.
And when I finished my evidence, that the committee room was filled with survivors and victims. And when I finished my evidence, as soon as I finished my evidence, and the chairperson says thank you, it was cut off. And my allies back in Jersey told me that the reason they cut it off immediately was that every single person in the committee room stood up and applauded.
Do you know what, though? Doesn't it? I know this sounds really simple, but all those people, for those normal public who come and congratulated and thank you for bringing this out and trying to do something, if they came together as themselves, they could deal with this. But they live in that fear, and they've got that programming, they've got that Stockholm syndrome. They've got it's all fear. You know, the Brexit thing, fear. We've got to be scared of everything. Yep. You know what? The world's burning, Lenny. I might as well sit back with a smile on my face and have some popcorn, because the world is on fire. If people think their little bubble You know, somebody said today, oh, as long as I can just have a gin and tonic when I get home, and a bit of telly, simple things, and I'm going, simple things. I wonder how long those simple things will be. Just give us the websites again, Len. So
right, okay. There's a Voice for Children blog. Now, when you Google Voice for Children, a couple come up, but it's a Voice for Children blog, and it's Jersey-based, and it's almost entirely, as the name suggests, to deal with almost entirely dealing with the care and the situation of children in Jersey. There was another one, Rico Sorda. That's Rico, Rico Sorda, and his blog is just called Rico Sorda. And then, of course, there's Stuart Sivry, Stuart STU Sivry SYVRET. Stuart was probably the first one, and he was the one who was the health minister, went to jail for trying to help the victims of abuse, had his life turned upside down, had to leave Jersey for some time because they were so much on his case. He's back in Jersey now. His health has been ruined by all of this, so worth having a look at those 3 blogs.
Good stuff. Good stuff, mate. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Lenny. It's been
very welcome.
I really enjoyed the chat. Even you're not half bad for a mank.
Listen, I managed to adjust my screen so I can't see your Liverpool badge on that jacket.
Hey. Well, it's been a fascinating chat. Brilliant chats. It's flowed right the way through. I've been sat here, I've been listening, and it's probably the longest that I've gone today without having a poo. So it's all good stuff. It's all going around. I'm sorry to everyone that I wasn't, and I'm sorry. My apologies to you, Lenny, that I wasn't. There were a couple of questions that I wasn't feeling very well. There were a couple of questions that I were going to ask, but we'll probably do that for another time, particularly about the cadaver dogs. Anyway, listen, thanks everyone in the chat room. It's been lively and vibrant in the chat room. Don't forget to support independent media. We'll be back tomorrow night. I've got a guest on. We'll be talking about how the Scottish referendum was a dry run for Brexit, and as quite topical as the Scottish referendum issue seems to have reared its ugly head again. So we'll be back tomorrow night, myself and Webby, and we'll be speaking with our guests. Thank you, Lenny. Cheers, Webby. Last word to you, mate.
No, Lenny, thanks again, mate. I look forward to it, especially when you brought up the cadaver dogs. I thought, oh, another story about them, because that's a really big bugbear for me. All the other speculation is just white noise in the background because I'm here. Something's not right about that apartment, about her clothes, and about the car. I can't go further than that. That's where it's got to. The investigation's got to stay within that for me. So, and I'm not a copper.
Okay, Paul.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lenny. Take care, mate. Thank you.
Cheers.